February 6, 1974, deep in the mountains of Fayette County. The main primary witness was a woman who lived in the mountains all her life, lived in a nice little cabin deep in the woods, very familiar with animals, lived there all her life, was a very good shot, and it was a normal evening. She was sitting there in her living room, had the TV on, when she began to hear this commotion on her little front porch. She had some empty pop cans out there. Someone was knocking the pop cans around. Well, previous to that, there had been some wild dogs seen around her property. And she figured, well, the dogs are probably back and are just disturbing what's on the porch. So she decided, you know what, I'll grab my shotgun and I'll just fire over their head and scare those dogs away. So she loads one chamber of her shotgun. And she turns on the porch light, switches it on, steps out on the front porch, and there's no dogs to be seen, but only about 6 feet away is this large, hairy, ape-like creature with its hand strapped over its head. And the many times I interviewed her, she never called it a Bigfoot, and I'll never forget what she said. She said, it looked like a great big hairy ape. Her reaction was, she fired right into it with her shotgun with one chamber. There was this bright flash of light, she said, like the flash on a camera. And that's what appeared to be a solid physical creature, physically disappeared right in front of her.
Are you a Bigfoot skeptic? Is the notion of an undiscovered primate inhabiting the forests of North America a little far-fetched for you? I'm about to tell you it gets a whole lot weirder than that. Well known to the Bigfoot community is the documenting of the encounters of thousands of eyewitnesses. Most of these sightings fall into categories of road crossings, glimpses caught by hunters in the woods, and distressing accounts of farmers losing livestock to a predator larger than even a bear. The more these accounts are shared, the more certain details emerge that suggest traits and behaviors that are rare or non-existent in the known animal kingdom. Following are the experiences and hypotheses of those brave enough to re-examine the nature of reality as it is popularly understood.
In 1971, I was involved with a group of hunters 8 miles back in the wilderness of Sierra Nevada mountains of California. And these creatures came in during the night and was taking what food we might have left out. And we didn't know what they were at first. The Johnson brothers, who first encountered them at this camp, which they'd been visiting since 1958, they thought it was a bear at first until they started hearing it, because it started knocking over the pots and pans out there by the stove that we had packed in with mules. And that's how you get into this area, either by really imposing area to get to, and it's nobody there. It's 8 miles back where the water starts out of the earth, where the springs are. But that got me involved in 1971 when they seen that track, came out and told us. We went back up, and there were 6 of us involved all together, all witness to this. We all started recording them. They started coming back in. Of course, we had firearms, heavy firearms. It was a hunting camp, and that's all it had been used for. But the Johnsons figured that these things may have been coming in there since 1958 when they started and just observing them. They don't know, but something aroused their attention that night. Warren Johnson seemed to think that one of them got burned on the stove or something, and it made out a scream. And anyway, it sounded like they were having a confrontation over maybe the food, or was it going to come in and eat the guys? You don't know. You just don't know. And you don't know to today what it was all about, other than they did reveal themselves to us with their vocalizations. We couldn't trick them with a camera trap. We tried over and over, but it's really easy to underestimate these things, and that's what we did then. That's what so many people do today. They think there's some ape out there in the woods running around beating on trees and stuff, and they're a little bit more than that. They use all kinds of devices, rock pounding or whooping, different things like that to disguise their vocalizations. But what they were doing around us was actually vocalizations, which Alan Berry, who we took in 1972, he started documenting what was going on to try to look for a hoax, actually, because it's pretty phenomenal. We didn't realize how phenomenal it was. We just started kind of having fun. They didn't come in the shelter at us, and we didn't shoot at them. So we figured, well, they're no plan on eating us, or they'd come in here already, and tore the shelter apart. So we got a little bit bold with them later on, started trying to interact with them, and the story is just pretty hard to believe. But it wasn't until 2008 till a cryptolinguist who was retired from the Navy as a cryptolinguist who got a hold of these. He heard them through the BFRO.net, and he thought he heard language in it, and he's trained to hear unknown languages, and 30 years worth of training. He teaches foreign languages today after his retirement out of the Navy, and anyway, he established that these things have a complex language within their vocalizations that were recorded. That's very unique. To me, it's huge, because I think there's something very special about language that we have. We have what we call sapient language. It's a morpheme stream of words that make up a sapient cognizant sentence. These things have that, and no other animal on the face of this earth is supposed to have that except humans.
I had my first encounter with the Bigfoot when I was 6 years old. I was at my grandmother's, and I was outside playing in the dirt with some sticks and things, and I heard somebody walk up. Well, I thought it was my grandmother, but when I looked up, it was a young male Bigfoot. And we just kind of stared at each other for a little while, and then he turned and walked away back into the woods. At this point, I jumped up, I ran in the house, and I told my grandmother what I'd seen, and I asked her, I said, "What was that, Granny?" And all she said to me then was, "What do you think it was?" And so she let me think about it for a while. And then she started to teach me about them. I've seen a lot of things in my lifetime. I've seen native elders do things in our lifetime that people say that can't happen. I believe that orbs are just another energy form of travel. And I was told that we humans could do that, but we've forgotten how to do that. I've witnessed them standing before me and just fading away. So what they do is not really paranormal as far as they're concerned, and many people are concerned. It is just their way of life. And as we grow in our minds and open our minds, then we begin to experience some of those same things. They do things that a lot of people question, but I always look at it as they're flesh and blood, as we are, but they do things. They do things that make you think, that get you out of the box.
I'm Bob Gimlin from Yakima, Washington, and my relevance to the Bigfoot film is a Patterson Gimlin film. Was acquired in 1967, October 20th, 1967, in the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California. We got a really active place up here in Washington at it's called Bumping Lake area in Washington. There's been a lot of activity in there, and I've been actively involved in Bigfoot ever since 1967. So in 51 years I've been involved with it directly or indirectly. Well, the way they leave things, they leave presents for us. different types of things. They leave stick formations. One time they left a little toy vehicle. I don't know where they got it from or anywhere, but they left that in the place of, well, we left them food to eat, and they leave us presents back again. So it's it's the thought of a thank you, kind of like a thank you, and so that to me means that they're more human-like than animal-like. So that's why I call them people of the woods.
A lot of people ask me how I got involved. Well, I got involved because my birthday happened to be during the Halloween season. And on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me a radio as a birthday gift, and I was tuning around the radio dial that night, and there was some radio discussion about unusual happenings. Haunted houses and flying saucers and strange creatures, and I was a curious young guy. I wanted to know if these stories were true, so I began to make a lot of trips at our local library and read all the books they had on the subject. I was 16 years old in 1965 when the Kecksburg UFO incident happened, but only about 12 miles actually from where I live. And it was after the Kecksburg incident that I began to go out into the field to do first-hand investigation of Bigfoot, UFOs, and other phenomena. Most Bigfoot encounters have no association with UFOs or any other type of unusual phenomena. And most UFO incidents have no connection with Bigfoot. However, there are numerous incidents that I personally investigated over the years since the 1970s, and I'm also aware, having been in touch with researchers around the country and around the world, of other very similar accounts from these far-reaching places, that they also have been aware of many unusual incidents over the years that have some type of strange phenomena or even a UFO connection to some of the Bigfoot reports. What is going on out there? Nobody seems to have the answer, but it's very, very intriguing. And it was during the major wave of 1973 that these type of reports began to come to my attention. Actually, going back a little further, the year before 1972, in this area, we were having some unusual activity going on. And during a certain time period, here in Westmoreland County around Greensburg, we were getting reports of UFO activity going on. But also, we began to get other reports along a large wooded area. People lived there for years. And they began to hear strange cries and screams at night, something heavy walking in the woods, began to see strange lights. We had a report of people seeing a large hairy creature chasing dogs through the woods, and people reporting these small little luminous globes of light very close to their homes, like right around the bushes, the windows of their homes. And it seemed very interesting, these type of reports. From the time I was young and the many years I had read about Bigfoot and heard about local incidents going on, I always felt that Bigfoot was very likely some type of unknown animal, some type of unknown primate. But it was during that major wave of 1973, in the 74, that some very strange cases came to my attention that, believe me, we weren't looking for this whatsoever. One of the first things that showed up is when my teams would get out to some of these locations soon after the incident. In some cases, there would be trails of footprints that would just suddenly stop and vanish. It didn't make any sense under the ground conditions that we were seeing. But since that time, we've had other incidents, even in fresh, heavy snow, where there's a series of tracks, there's no other tracks around, and these large footprints suddenly just stop and disappear, which we began to wonder, like, what's going on here? Then we began to hear some other very strange accounts from that time period. Again, 1973, there wasn't a lot of shows about Bigfoot on TV. It wasn't like it is today. And once again, many people initially would call the police reporting these incidents when this was going on.
A gentleman came in here. He lives in South Georgia. He's a little advanced in age, so he had his family, his son, his son's wife, and their children bring him up here. And he had a story that I've only shared with a few people, but he was about 17 years old, and him, another friend of his who was his neighbor he didn't know very well, and one of his friends from school, and two girls, which were sisters. There was 5 of them in a van, and they had parked not too far from here, at kind of a little overlook. And this would have been back in the mid 70s, I guess. And he says, I didn't know my neighbor kid very well. And we lived on farms. And he said we had actually had some beer in the van, but we didn't even crack it open yet. So see, the 5 of us are sitting in the van. I'm in the driver's seat. One of the sisters is in the passenger seat next to me, and the other 3 are in the back seat. And I had just parked the van, put it in park at the overlook, and he says we were just talking easy. We might have been parked there for a minute or two, kind of getting settled in. All of a sudden, all heck breaks out in the back of the van. I hear screaming, and the van starts to rock. I turn around, and where one of my friends was sitting, he's no longer there. Sitting in his place is an 8-foot hairy giant person, looking bewildered, almost like shocked. Everybody's screaming at him. He says, I don't know where this thing came from. I reached over to open up my driver's side van door, and when I grabbed my door, I inadvertently hit the interior light. He said, I turned around and looked in the back of the van, and where this thing was sitting, my friend was back, looking just as bewildered. He said it was complete pandemonium after that. He said they were yelling at their friend, like thinking he was pulling some kind of joke, but he was acting like he didn't know what was going on. He said, we all plainly saw this thing sitting in the van where my friend was at. He said, it was a total accident. I had turned my light on. When I flipped my light on, I turned around, this thing was gone, and my friend was sitting back there. And we all saw it. It wasn't a trick of the light. And the fellow where he was sitting was his neighbor that he didn't know very well. And he said that after we got back to the house, I never really spoke to this kid. I didn't know him very well, and after that we got back, I never really saw him after that. A man had his entire family drive him up here, and they were standing by his side. They weren't all like shuffling around when he was telling me this story. They stood there supporting him as he told me this.
Most people have at some point in their life experienced something that they are unable to naturally explain. Perhaps it was a dream. Perhaps it was a trick of the mind. Perhaps it was something else, a glimpse of there being more to this world than meets the eye. To pursue this unknown is to go down the proverbial rabbit hole. The deeper one goes, the greater the risk of becoming unmoored from reason. A risk that is enticing for some, but a grave warning for others.
In common practice, in just popular understanding, folks oftentimes think of paranormal not just as those things that are outside of our current scientific understanding, but paranormal is used as a proxy for things that are perceived to be outside the possibility of being understood by science generally. And so oftentimes in popular usage, and especially in the Bigfoot community, the idea of the paranormal is really used where perhaps the more accurate term academically would be something like supernatural. That there are things that are outside of the physical world, things that cannot be necessarily apprehended or understood using the tools and the theories of science. So I think that that's something just to bear in mind, is that the terminology itself can be a little problematic. You have to make sure that you're talking about the same things. Scientists, historians, and such, what academics tend to focus on what is probable, or at least what is plausible. And even if one says, well, hey, is it possible that Sasquatch is it possible that Bigfoot is an extraterrestrial human hybrid that rides around in flying saucers and engages with people telepathically? Maybe that's possible, but it really seems a stretch.
Some of my team members and I were at a location along the base of the Chestnut Ridge between Lake Trobe and Darien. And we're interviewing people about this Bigfoot that had been seen in the area on several occasions recently at that time. And the one person reluctantly indicated that this creature seemed to be trying to mentally communicate. While we were there, this person said that this creature is indicating that tomorrow morning there would be a UFO incident over Homer City, Pennsylvania. So that's about 15 miles from this location. This location is Westmoreland County. That would be Indiana County, and it would be taking place near Homer City. There's a big power plant up in that area. Very interestingly, the next morning, numerous people in that Homer City area reported this very strange, loud sound, like something very low maneuvering over the area. They were calling the police, and it led to a search by the fire department and the police in the area. They found absolutely nothing, and they have no idea. It actually made the news up there.
Yes, I believe in mind speak or telepathy. I mean, humans use it all the time and don't even realize that they're doing it. You be riding down the road maybe with somebody and something comes into your mind and that person says that very thing and you go, wait a minute, I was just thinking that. Well, how did that happen? That thought was out there and you picked up on it. So it's just a matter of opening yourself up and thinking about the possibilities.
I think that telepathy, or mind speak, as people often call it in the Sasquatch research field, is a natural ability shared by many human beings and more powerful, more refined and advanced within Sasquatch. I'm actually writing a book on mind speak, and I'm getting a lot of feedback from people who have experienced this. And I'm researching studies that have been done into human telepathy. And not only has it been proven to be statistically significant what people can do through telepathy, but it has been shown to be especially prevalent among autistic savants. So that, to me, is another building block in this, my theory about the affinity between autistic savants and Sasquatch. I think we're in that same spot with regard to telepathy. We have no idea what kind of field or mechanism is responsible for or allows for telepathy to occur.
You know, I don't know if they understand our language. I think they understand our intent, because I think they can see, as many animals can, they can see your energy. We all have an energy and aura that we send out. And if they can see your intent, or as a lot of people want to say, they mind speak. When my new book, The Quantum Bigfoot, I get into what causes that. It's called quantum entanglement. It's the same as you see a school of fish in the ocean. They're all moving around like this, you know, together. They're not talking to each other. They're entangled. Same way the birds. Well, there's no classical explanation for that, but there is a thing called telepathy and sensing things that we have that hardly anybody denies. And you get into that, and how do you explain that? You have to get into the quantum field, quantum mechanics, to understand how everything works from the subatomic level, everything. The subatomic level of your cell, way down deep. Everything is there, comes up.
There's an old saying back in the day that people, what we would today call mind speak, is back in the day they would call it voices in your head. Okay, so voices in your head doesn't scream scientific to me. It certainly does not scream stability. So people might not like my outlook on mind speak, but I don't buy into that. I don't believe that something can put a thought in your head or communicate with you, literally have a conversation. With our advancement in science and the leaps and bounds we've seen over the last 100 years with communication, with travel, with science, with everything. You would think we would be ahead of it by now, let alone a flesh and blood creature in the woods that literally has to hide from us. If it's that superior, why would it hide from us? Why would it communicate with someone and tell it what to do if it was still hiding from us? So I do not buy into the mind speak. I think that it is what they make of it. If you desire so bad to have a sighting, or if you desire so bad to have communication with somebody or something and feel that you have that, your mind will present that to you. You will make out of it what you want.
There are people who claim that they have seen Sasquatch disappear. And a good friend of mine, whom I trust completely, saw one crossing in front of her in the daytime when she was driving. And it all of a sudden was not there anymore. Now, many people move to the interpretation that they are interdimensional, that Sasquatch can enter a portal and go to another place. I think there's no reason to be able to say 100% that that's not possible, but my turn of mind leads me to want to explore all other possibilities first. And for instance, this ability to use electric fields that I think they have, and that I can talk about more, starts me down the path of thinking, how could they play with light and manipulate our vision by using this electromagnetic field? Scientists, physicists have already created what is essentially an invisibility cloak a la Harry Potter with electromagnetic fields. And all it takes is the ability to bend light around an object so that what the observer sees is what is behind the object rather than the object itself. I would sooner believe this. I would be 100 times more likely to believe this, even though we don't yet know how they do it, than to believe the easier answer, the magical answer, that they step into another realm entirely.
I've heard of the invisibility cloak, that sort of thing. So let's take a look at science. Science, we can't explain everything that we see in science. Illusions that people like David Copperfield, you swear it's disappearing, but you know that it's actually there. So there's a lot of things we don't understand scientifically that would lead us to believe that maybe something disappeared in front of our very eyes. But as far as an animal or a creature that could actually disappear in front of you, I'm a flesh and blood believer. I think that if it moves in the woods, it has to have something that it eats. It has to be able to drink. It has to be able to provide for itself and a shelter. So if something were able to disappear and reappear at will, it would disappear and reappear where there's a good food source, where there were less restrictive boundaries. It would only make sense.
How does something disappear? I used to just discard reports that people tell me, we saw this thing disappear. Well, maybe they did, but I used to just discard them because I thought, well, nah, these things, no, they walk around. Because one thing I do believe, they have to be flesh and blood, because they breathe, they walk, they leave prints, they poop, they eat like we do, they procreate, they do it all. But my question to people who want to live just in that one world, could there be more to them? And I think there definitely is more to them, and I think the answer is in the quantum physics. And I don't want to shut anybody off here because it's hard to understand quantum physics. You get into it, it's really mind-boggling. Newtonian physics is not, it's based on everything being measurable, everything being material or physical, where quantum mechanics is not. It reaches outside that box, that paradigm that so many classical scientists are locked into, and they won't move out of it because they have to use those parameters that classical science has established for them. And that's Newtonian physics, 1687. Get into Einstein, Bohr, Tesla, these guys who had to reach further to find out how things work, which leads me to another thing, which that's a vibrational frequency, and that's how now I don't discard these people that say they saw one disappear. Because if you can raise your vibrational frequency high enough, you can disappear. You turn the light first, then you go straight into energy. How they go from matter to energy and back is a good question, because I don't know how that happens, but I think they can do that. And I think they do that through the vocal mechanism. And I haven't been saying that too much because it's kind of hard to get a hold of, but they do have a vocal mechanism that's so superior to ours, and yet you have all these people over the years now that I've been interviewing that say they saw them disappear, but then it happened to me. I didn't see it disappear, but my daughter saw one, found its trackway, found it, and it just stopped. And I looked around a boulder, to jump to a boulder, to jump into a tree, where'd it go? Those tracks were that deep. We couldn't even make a print. It was just, that solidified something to me. There's got to be an answer for this.
People also see orbs, and they think that this is an indication of some sort of supernatural aspect of Sasquatch. But orbs can also be caused by electromagnetic effects. One of my favorite habituators, whom I visited many times in East Texas, used to have an orb that would patrol her yard, her property, about 30 feet in the air. It would kind of go in a square, in a grid. And she would see this very frequently. And one time, she lived by herself. She took a sawed-off shotgun. This is East Texas. This is the culture. She has a sawed-off shotgun. She went outside and shot the thing. And all these branches and leaves came raining down, and the thing just disappeared. So it's not solid. We know that from that incident and from everybody else who says that they vanish after a while. My hunch is that Sasquatch are able to deploy their force, their electromagnetic force, in such a way that they can make it into balls. And perhaps they can extend their perception through these balls. I don't know. But what I know is that, rather I should say what I think is, because I don't want to step on anybody's toes, is that this is not something supernatural. This is contained within the nature of electricity and electromagnetism. Something is able to be connected to their mind such that they can send out a certain kind of probe and extend their perceptions that way. And you might ask, how is it possible that a mammal, a primate, would have this electrical aspect to them? I mean, we know that there are a lot of marine creatures that have electricity at their disposal, but not mammals and not primates, except that there are primates that have this capacity, and they are human beings. There are people known as electric people that you can research. I've researched this, and they will walk into a room, and if their emotions are exercised, they will cause light bulbs to either break or just go out. They can't wear watches, they can't use cell phones, because they have this electricity coursing through them and emanating from them that will disable electronics, just like Sasquatch disables our electronics so often in field research. They will walk down a street, these electric people, and sometimes the street lights will dim or go out above them. And then when they move on, that street light comes back on and the next street light goes out.
One of the things that is oftentimes reported as evidence of Bigfoot being a paranormal creature is the reports of strange lights in the forest, or orbs. Oftentimes, small balls of light that travel through the woods. And I think this is a great example of the way that we put things together has a huge impact on the way we think about the evidence. So I'll give you a concrete example of this. I've had personal conversations with amateur Bigfoot investigators who report. In the one case, someone who's in the paranormal supernatural camp who has reported seeing these orbs of light in conjunction with sightings of Bigfoot, and says, hey, this is an example of why there's something weird, there's something really strange going on. On the other hand, I've had conversations with another amateur Bigfoot investigator who just offhandedly has told me, oh, yeah, there's this other interesting thing that happens in my research area, is that I see these strange balls of light that fly through the forest, and I've seen them and not found evidence of Bigfoot. I've seen them and then found evidence of Bigfoot. I think that these are some kind of maybe large firefly or insect, presumably a very similar thing, and yet the way that he narrates that is, the way that he puts narrative to that experience is that, oh, well, here's another, hey, we've got one unacknowledged creature out in the woods. Here, we've got an unacknowledged insect out in the woods, or something like that. So how you put it together is really important. And seeing strange lights doesn't necessitate a supernatural explanation. Doesn't even necessitate connecting these things.
There's more to it. We had lights shining up there that we can't account for, orbs, and falling around. We heard, just in 2016 when I was up there, had this lightsaber size tube of light go floating by us up there. And I mean, we watched it for several seconds. It was nighttime, but we were watching it, and a little bit scary. You don't know what that's doing. You still don't know, but because there had been some wood knocks earlier, there had been some other things going on. These things are still around. The same family group we think is still around, whatever that means. Because if they can step out of time, like we talked about before, if they can step out of our dimension, be interdimensional, that means that their time will not be the same as ours. But anyway, this lightsaber went right by us, and it just kept going. But I don't know what to think about it. It just went floating between the trees. Wasn't fast. So what do you do with that? That's paranormal, you want to call it? Paranormal is just a word that means we don't understand it. It's outside of our normal. But it doesn't mean it's really wrong. It just means it goes beyond classical science, quantum physics.
I have 2 pair of military night vision goggles. The only colors that you see in those are black, green, and just different shades of green. There's no other way to get a color in there. You won't see blues or pinks or reds. It's going to stay those. It's not capable. So the lenses in those cameras don't accept any of the color. It literally takes the ambient light from the stars and the moon and give you enough light to see in the dark. Your depth of perception is a little sketchy, but you have a pretty clear image of what you're seeing, especially if you have a good set. So during our experience in SOA, nothing happened until late. You're talking midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. But there we are. We're tired. Sleep deprivation. We'd been running all day long. We were all up and down the hillsides. There's some caves and some contour that's just absolutely beautiful. So late at night, we're watching. I'm looking through the night vision goggles. And there were 2 things that happened that just are unexplained to me to date. One was a light that it looked like a small light that opened up, like you would see an eye, where just a small little light opened, and then it opened up a little bit, and then it closed back up and disappeared. And I thought that was interesting with respect that it looked like from a distance somebody shined a flashlight and you know how you turn it to make the beam bigger and then you shut it back down. It's very similar to that, but it was white. Nothing else illuminated around it, and it blocked out whatever was behind it. And everybody's screaming, "That was a portal, you saw a portal." I saw a light in my night vision goggles. The other thing that happened through the night vision goggles was I literally saw red, which is also not possible through those lenses. So the red that I saw, where if you were just sitting watching somebody in a distance, they light a cigarette and the red from the cigarette, or from the flame, or the glow of a cigarette, it was just red. I saw something just red appear and then just turn into a pinpoint and disappeared again. That to me, scientifically, I cannot explain. But my first leap would not be it was paranormal. It was just unexplained. So it doesn't mean that I had an experience that was paranormal or out of this world. It was just something that we don't understand, an anomaly, possibly. Who knows?
In all the years I've been doing this, I've never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself, but I have seen the animal reactions when they're close to these Bigfoot creatures. And while it's been reported in horses and cattle and cats, and even we've had reports of very young children, babies inside their homes, reacting very unusual, crying very, very upset on the nights when these creatures have been near to the property. That's something that's shown up as well. But it's very common with dogs. Even the most vicious dogs, in many, many cases, when they're close to the creatures, they're just like paralyzed. They don't bark, they shake, they hide, they cower. People have told me they've seen them in their boxes, just lying there, moving their eyes around and not making a sound.
Most people think that they don't like dogs. And I had a dog, Watto, who was a bull mastiff, and they had no problem with her, but she was taught to be respectful of them. Now, if you've got a dog and that dog is being aggressive, or a dog comes at you, what are you gonna do? You're gonna take care of yourself. You're gonna protect yourself, you're gonna protect your child, and they're gonna do the same thing.
Countless reports say that people are walking in the forest and all of a sudden all of the crickets and katydids and birds and frogs go silent. This is a very common phenomenon when they find themselves in the proximity of a Sasquatch. After they hear this silence, hush fall over the forest, they will then realize that there's a Sasquatch 100 feet away or something, and they'll hear its footsteps, it'll knock, it will sometimes whoop at them. And this silence in the forest stays this way. If it were just vibration of the Sasquatch stepping, crickets will silence themselves in response to vibration, but they won't stay silent. And if Sasquatch stays still, as they're famous for doing, just stock still, the crickets would start up again, because they're not realizing, oh, there's a Sasquatch, I better be quiet because it's dangerous. They would just wait for the vibrations to stop, unless there were an electromagnetic field filling the environment right around the Sasquatch, in which case the insects and the frogs and the birds would likely be caused to fall silent because of that. I've done a little bit of research, and there are papers in which certain kinds of beetles and other insects are arrested by electromagnetic pulses being sent their way.
A lot of times our batteries will go dead up there, and I think they can drain your batteries. In fact, I know that from when I was up there in 2011, I think it was.
I found that many low-level, close-range UFO sightings, and many encounters with cryptids, Bigfoot, the huge thunderbird, the flying creatures, the black panthers, other strange entity reports, they very commonly occur in the vicinity of energy sources. There are many sightings, for example, around radio communication towers, power plants and high-tension power lines, gas wells, gas lines, rivers, reservoirs. It goes on and on and on. I have no doubt, whatever we're dealing with, there is an energy connection there. Some people have actually tried to take photographs, and the camera malfunctioned while they were taking the picture. And afterwards, it worked fine again. But you hear this a lot in the paranormal field, and you used to hear about a lot in the UFO field, but it's something that goes on, but it's something that a lot of people have missed. I can tell you one case I recall back in the 1980s here in western Pennsylvania. It was during the evening, and these two people were riding down this back road. They had the high beams on, and they said, suddenly, out of nowhere, as though this thing just suddenly appeared, here's this 7 to 8 foot tall. The arms and legs were so long, the driver had instantaneously had to swerve to miss hitting it. It's huge, and it's there, and they both said it just like it came out of nowhere, and as they're very close to this thing, suddenly the car begins to lose its power and was slowing down. And the passenger started yelling to the person, hurry up, get out of here. And the person's gassing and gassing the pedal to try to move, and it seemed as though the harder the person hit the gas pedal, the slower the car would go. And as it slowly moved away from where the creature was, the power began to come back on to normal.
I have a naturalistic, empirical approach to the subject. So I would rather rule out every possible scientific, natural explanation before I begin to find recourse to other sorts of explanations, supernatural explanations, or what I consider more magical thinking. So for instance, when people find that they're being zapped, as they call it, and their electronic equipment becomes disrupted, some people find that to be paranormal. I think it's more likely that it has something to do with electromagnetic fields that are naturally occurring in our world, and that somehow Sasquatch is able to marshal and use. And I don't yet know how they do that. Cameras just won't work. 0.00001% of the time, a game camera will catch a little glimpse or a blurry, tuft of hair or something, and someone with a cell phone will catch a Sasquatch kind of departing off through the trees or hiding behind a big tree. But that's not going to teach us anything, because that's how they are when they know we're observing them. I think they mind audio technology much less for some reason than they mind video technology. I think they will, from what I've been able to learn, they allow themselves to be themselves more readily when there's audio recording around.
The general consensus seems to be, not generally speaking, that these are a naturally evolved creature that came from our distant past that perhaps branched off of us. But my argument with that is that these creatures are super predators. They are perfectly evolved to hunt from wherever they evolved from on this planet. And it makes no sense that their fossils and skeletons are not in our fossil and skeletal records. There is no logical explanation why we have fossils from millions and millions of years ago. We have fossils from 6,000 individuals, ancient human individuals, scattered throughout our museums in the world, but we have zero of a super predator that inhabits every continent on this planet except for Antarctica. That simple fact negates the natural progression and evolved on this planet. We should have the proof, and we have, other than a few pictures and some great audio, we have no hard proof of 10, 11, 12-foot giants living amongst us, thousands upon thousands of sightings. So my argument is that if they are what a lot of people say they are, where is the proof?
I think one of the reasons why folks become interested in these supernatural theories for Bigfoot is this question of where's the body? If this is a physical creature, where's the body? And of course, there are various ways of thinking about that. There's various sort of apologies that can be made for why we haven't found a body. I mean, these may be very rare species. Certainly, the lack of these things in the fossil record may not really be much of an issue. The fossil record is a lot more sparse than most people think for large animals in general. The fossil record, for example, we know that our current model about Neanderthals and Neanderthal habitation of Europe was that Neanderthals inhabited Europe for about 300,000 years. What is our fossil evidence for that? We have partial fossils for about 300 individuals. 300 individuals over a span of 300,000 years. And some of those partial fossils are just as simple as a tooth. So that's not to say that we don't know. That's not to say that we don't have a good model for Neanderthal habitation of Europe. But that is to say that the basis of that model is not what most people would probably assume.
They're not apes, nor are they supernatural wizards, in my view. They are another evolutionary line of the Homo genus. And according to Melba Ketchum, whose work is controversial, but according to what she has found, I think it's pretty clear that Sasquatch arose through a hybridization between human females and males of another species that we haven't yet discovered. We're discovering new cousins very frequently now, and I think that will only continue. We may have just scratched the surface. And one of those is the male progenitor of Sasquatch. And interestingly, this male progenitor need not have been much larger than we ourselves, need not have been as large as Sasquatch is. I say this about the size of the ancestor of Sasquatch because there are many examples in nature in which the parents of a hybridization are both smaller than the offspring. The most well-known example is the liger, who is the offspring of a lion and a tiger, and that offspring is twice as large as either the lion or the tiger. There is just a hybridization phenomenon where there is what's called hybrid vigor, where the offspring is more fit for survival and more kind of impressive than the parents.
I went to college. I went through algebra, trigonometry, calculus, and you get to a certain point where you start understanding things that you certainly don't use it in everyday life, but you understand different ideas and how science works on a different level. To this day, I believe Bigfoot possible. I believe in the possibility of it, but I will never stand up and say that Bigfoot absolutely, without a doubt, exists until I've literally felt it and been proven to myself at a Class A sighting. I've seen a lot of things in the woods that I question, but without definitive proof, I don't buy it.
When I tie quantum physics and classical science, I show the difference between them. But Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who passed away recently, he said that it takes science, quantum science and classical science together to have clear perception. That's a great thing to say because it does. You'll only be restricted by classical sciences you've been trained for in grammar school. Spirituality and physics have been together up until this modern classical science has, no, you got to have everything in a box here. And it's got to be based on Newtonian physics, which says everything's measurable and physical and material, no, that's not true. If you want to know what's really going on, you got to get into the quantum world and understand that there's just so much going on around us that we just don't see. We see in a three-dimensional paradigm that we live in, not a paradigm, but a three-dimensional world. And that world tells us, okay, you see this, so that's real. You hear that, it must be real. Well, all those things are real to us because we've been trained to use our senses only to determine what's real. When someone says, well, it's just a theory, a quantum theory, it's called quantum theory because you'll never see it. Your eyes don't see it. It's another world. And in order to prove it or establish it as something that's going to be acceptable by physicists worldwide, it's through mathematics. That's what Einstein did. Mathematics. If you're going to disprove it, you've got to disprove it mathematically. So therefore, it's acceptable by physicists as long as it's established mathematically. Where classical science is a different ballgame altogether.
I have never had a problem with science, and if it hasn't proven the mind speak, or if it hasn't proven so many of the things they do, like when you're watching them and they just literally dematerialize right in front of you, can science prove that now? Maybe not, but I believe that they will at some point. What we know from science right now, 100 years ago, would not have been proven. You have to bring a hypothesis. You have to bring something to science. Science has to have something to look for. And then once you have someone looking into that and finding all those variables and putting them together, then science proves something. But science proves and disproves itself all the time. But that's the good part of science, because as things happen, then we can go back in there and look at it and prove things.
I think science really wants to explain away the importance of spirituality. I think a pure science, there's more to life than pure science. There's some things that scientists can't explain, and I think the older you get in life, the more you realize how important your spirituality is. And speaking as far as science goes, it's such a changing. It changes. People who are 100% invested in science, I think they forget how often scientists are wrong and it changes. Science is constantly evolving, and the nature is that if you're going to use science, you have to realize that it's just going to change.
Skepticism is an important part of scientific thinking, but the way that term skepticism is embraced and used by a lot of folks in our popular culture is an over-skepticism, if you will. It is oftentimes making claims that if the current scientific evidence does not support a proposition, then therefore it is not true. This is a confusion of no evidence with evidence of no. There's a difference between not having evidence of something and something not being correct.
We've had a lot of people come in here and ask me if I've ever heard of the Nephilim. And I say, well, of course I have. And I think these creatures are discussed in the Bible. I think there's some answers that we're looking for we can be found in the Bible and other ancient writings. I think you should turn to some of the ancient writings to find answers to questions that we're asking. I think people in ancient times were asking the same questions we're asking now, and as they found some answers, they wrote them down. So I don't think we should ignore those, just like we shouldn't ignore the Native Americans' teachings about these creatures. And I think that's where a lot of the science has to be put aside, and you got to go back and read the history, and I think that's where you're going to find a lot of the answers as well.
You can't just dive into the Bible to get the answers when it comes to Bigfoot. There's other literature that you need to look at as well in order to try to start connecting dots. And that's all we're doing. We're trying to connect dots. And nobody's going to do it for us, so sometimes you got to get your hands dirty and dive in. So in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, it talks about the fallen angels coming to earth, having sex with women, and their offspring becoming giants, Nephilim. It's often described in different translations of the Bible as giants or Nephilim. And so the Bible talks about these Nephilim giants, but it's very brief in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. It's a very brief mentioning, and it doesn't really get into detail throughout anywhere in the Bible. But if you start reading, especially the Old Testament, you start seeing these giants popping up here and there that a lot of times people just gloss over. They don't really connect the dots. Like for instance, one is David and Goliath, right? Goliath was a giant. Nobody really connects the dots that Goliath wasn't just a giant, he was a Nephilim. He had I believe it was three or four other brothers that were giants as well, that King David later on wound up killing. And so these giants pop up, and in fact, if you start looking into it in detail, there's possibly up to 36 different tribes of Nephilim giants in the Old Testament. When you look into the extra canonical texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants, it gets really, really interesting, because we find out that not only did the fallen angels have sex with women, but they also had sex with animals and plants. They disrupted DNA. Hold on a second. If they did that with animals, would they have a similar outcome like they did with the women? And that's where I draw the connection with Bigfoot and all these other cryptids that people see. The fact that maybe, if they did this, these cryptids that we're seeing are actually a Nephilim remnant from ancient days. And if that's the case, would they have some kind of supernatural capabilities like their fathers?
Nowadays, you got some of this DNA that's being taken in, and they say, well, it's tainted, it's got human DNA in it. It's because I believe, I'm getting ahead of myself maybe a little, but I think they're a cross between a human and something else. The something else is the question, because the nuclear DNA, as opposed to the maternal DNA, which is the female side, is unknown, and they can't find the match for it. Out of 224 billion samples, there's no match for the male counterpart to these things. But there's something else goes on with my theory, and that's, I think there's more than one type because of that, because I think there's been intervention by the aliens from the cosmos, and that falls right into Greek mythology, falls right into biblical history, the Book of Enoch, which you get into the Bible, and it'll talk about that. Even though Enoch's not canonized because it wasn't discovered until later on, but it was. It's very unique in that it talks about what each of these fallen ones did. They call them fallen angels because they fell from what they were supposed to be and they interfered with humanity. That's what gave us a kickstart in a lot of stuff. So there's also a history goes back into the Sumerians, Anunnaki, and all that stuff, which a person just starts studying this stuff, it gets really, really interesting. It has to me anyway. And what the future could hold for it is still to be found out.
The reality is that the Nephilim are something that are barely mentioned in the Bible. Barely, there's some legend and lore and mythology that comes about at a later time, but scholars really don't claim to know much about the Nephilim because it's kind of an offhand, sort of a parenthetical comment in the text, that these were somehow an offspring between heavenly creatures and human women. But that's about all that's mentioned there. What's also very interesting is that the way of reading the Bible in that way, of sort of mining it for evidence of the physical world, that way of reading the Bible is really not that old. A century, maybe two, and it's really very much rooted in a very Protestant and a very American method of again, looking at biblical text and trying to pull things out. Most of the discussion of the Nephilim actually found in extra biblical text that generally are not regarded as authoritative or virtually ignored by the folks who generally do this type of reading.
Although Melba Ketchum has a lot of detractors, her work itself, the data that she has extracted from the 109 tissue samples, organic samples that people throughout North America contributed to her 2012 study. And what she found is that the mitochondrial DNA of Sasquatch is human, only with just enough mutations to allow us to extrapolate backwards in time to about 15,000 years ago. The nuclear DNA, which is the mother and the father, is not easily interpretable. It was beyond her pay grade, whereas she has spent a career analyzing mitochondrial DNA in her life as a geneticist. She hasn't analyzed a lot of nuclear DNA. So what we can trust, I think, entirely in her research findings is that Sasquatch mitochondrial DNA are human, but that the nuclear DNA are not. This tells me that her provisional conclusion that there was a hybridization era is to be accepted until we can find a better explanation for this strange dichotomy between the human aspect of Sasquatch DNA and the non-human aspect of Sasquatch DNA. I think that while it's possible that aliens performed genetic engineering on humans and created Sasquatch for their own purposes, I don't see any evidence of that. And it's possible that Sasquatch is the Nephilim from the Bible, and that the mitochondrial DNA that seems to show human female could line up with what the Bible says about fallen angels lying with human females and creating the race of Nephilim. But I don't see any evidence for that either. I mean, it seems that to try to argue that is just to take this one finding and transplant it into the biblical framework. And while it could be true, what do I know? It doesn't seem to me more likely, even remotely as likely, as a hybridization between human females and a related primate species.
You know, people ask me about my thought or my belief that they were here before we were here. There are a lot of things that are not written in the Bible about this earth that we live on. And so for me to say that everything on this earth exists in the Bible is not something that I would say. Now, could they be the giants? Possibly. I know that they were here before the Bible was written. Could they factor into that belief system? But if you take any belief system, any religion on this earth, and there are many, they all have stories about giants, hairy people, and different things. So yes, something that was already here when that was written would factor into it. They would have that in there. Do I believe that they're the Nephilim? No, I don't. I have never seen anything that would even begin to lead me to believe that. And so, yeah, they could be. I mean, they were here before.
My experiences with them are that they're humanoid type creatures. And I call them a creature because we don't know what to really call them until, but I've had experiences, enough experiences with them to know that they're human type individuals. I call them people of the forest. And that might be the wrong name for them, but to me they're human type creatures. And so many people say, oh well, they're just an animal. Well, they're not an animal to me. They're people of the woods, and until proven to what they really are, you know, that's the way I'm going to leave it as such, and I treat them as such.
They are a people, as we are a people. Their role on this earth is one of living with the earth. They don't try to change anything about it. They live with the earth. And there are some things that we humans need to learn about that. And that takes us back to learning about ourselves. And since I believe that we are spiritual beings here having a human experience, that helps us to grow.
I began to notice certain parallels with autistic people. Sasquatch are often reported to sway back and forth. They don't just avoid people, but they also seek to interact with us. And the only two creatures on the face of the earth, as far as I know, that have this two-sided behavioral profile are Sasquatch and autistic people. I began to notice that there were other things that Sasquatch do that autistic people do too. There's often a thing that is called stimming or self-stimulation, which just means doing things that allow them to soothe themselves and feel more comfortable. Autistic people will often flap their hands or snap their fingers or sway back and forth or bob like this. And people see Sasquatch bobbing and swaying a lot, and they also hear Sasquatch making lots of percussion. It's a very, very percussive species. That's one of the things that allows us to know when they're around. And if you think about it, they are, by all accounts, and all of us agree, that Sasquatch is insanely intelligent. Otherwise they would not be able to accomplish what they accomplish. And yet, they build structures and knock on trees, two things that allow us to know when they're in the area. If they could choose not to do these two things, we would think that their project of stealth would be 100 times easier for them. And yet they seem unable to refrain from knocking on trees. And human beings say, oh, there's a Sasquatch over there. I mean, it seems kind of like proof that they need to knock on trees, because they wouldn't think this will be a good thing for our safety. They knock, they drum. I recorded hundreds and hundreds of incidents of drumming in the forest 3 years ago in a ravine near where I live. For them, the human race in general, I think, is the other, rather than other individuals of their own kind. I think that there's enough evidence already that they work together in concert in very well organized bands and groups, so that we don't have to assume that their form of what I'm calling autism is the same as our form of what I'm calling autism. They don't seem to need to be solitary as human autistic people tend to be. It seems that they feel that their group is all an extension of oneself, whereas the human race is the other. So it's different. I think my hunch is that in ancient times there was a common ancestor between us and Sasquatch that possessed some form of what later evolved into our form of autism and evolved into a separate path into what manifests itself in Sasquatch. And it's not just these behavioral characteristics, it's also the gifts that they have. So that's why I don't call my theory the Sasquatch autism theory, but the Sasquatch savant theory, because I'm talking about not human autistic people who are very disabled and limited by their autism, but rather the savants who have an ingenious capacity for visual thinking, for memorizing their field of vision. There's an autistic person called the human camera who took a flight over Milan, Italy in a helicopter and then came back down after one flight and faithfully drew thousands of details of the city just from internalizing the landscape and every single nuance of the city.
You start off thinking you're going to be looking for a relic hominid or maybe a missing link, and then you start getting reports, first-hand witnesses that describe things to you that they've seen them do with their own eyes that defy logical, scientific explanation. And at first you dismiss them as maybe they were mistaken, or it was a trick of light, or maybe these folks are not being honest with you. But when the same kind of reports come in over and over again, and you start to see patterns emerge that you can't ignore anymore, you realize that what these creatures are, even though you may not have a hard answer for it, they're much more than we think they are. And whether they are a creature not native to this planet or this dimension, I don't know for certain, but I know quite confidently that they are not a naturally evolved creature from this planet. And what they are, boy, it's really hard to put your finger on. I don't know anybody that knows for sure what they are, but I know what they're not. And that's why I'm still digging into this every day, 15, 16 hours a day. It never stops. And I think if I knew what they were, some of the fun would be taken out of it, some of the mystery would be taken out of it. But I think when we finally come to the answer, it might be an answer that you can't tell anybody. It might be an answer so frightening and scary and disturbing that it might be an answer that you have to keep to yourself for the rest of your life. You may have to die with it, because to tell people what they are, it may be a clue as to who we are, and that may be too disturbing.
I'm not so sure anybody has the answers as to what's really going on out there. I believe it's a very complex phenomena, that it may well be that certain aspects of this phenomena, both with Bigfoot and UFOs and cryptids, that may well be well beyond our present scientific understanding. Again, when I first started on this, I always thought that Bigfoot was some type of unknown primate. I keep an open mind until we have really good physical evidence one way or another. But some of these cases that I looked into suggest we're dealing with something that's a lot more than that, something beyond the flesh and blood explanation. I am not suggesting that Bigfoot is a passenger riding around a spaceship from another world, because we don't know what we're dealing with. We don't even know what the UFOs are. Many theories on that. Some believe they're extraterrestrial. Some feel that they could be some type of unknown natural phenomena. We could be dealing with all these things. Could it be time travelers? Reluctant as I am to say it, more and more data suggests to me that, for a lack of a better term, we're dealing with something that's interdimensional. That these things come into our physical reality under certain conditions. They can look physically solid at times, but not in all cases have they been. Even with Bigfoot, they can leave some evidence and then they're gone. They come and they go.
At the end of the day, we have to say, I don't know. I don't know is perhaps the most uncomfortable phrase for a human being to accept. That's why we end up with with so many theories that people sometimes cling to very stubbornly.
When confronted with the unknown, it is natural for us to turn to the tenets of our various belief systems to navigate the circumstance. The frequently posed scenario asking how humanity would respond if a new intelligence were revealed could likely be answered by this concept. Some would be eager to embrace without reserve. Others would be greatly concerned with questions of good and evil and how the newcomers are aligned. And perhaps the discussion of belief in Sasquatch or his ability to accomplish astonishing feats is actually a discussion about ourselves and how we respond when presented with strange new concepts.
In all my years of life, I've never had a bad encounter. I've never felt like I should not be in an area where they are. One of the things that happens with them is, and I go back to something my grandmother said, they are like us in ways and they are not like us in ways. I'm very comfortable in my beliefs and who I am, and I'm comfortable with people challenging those. I don't learn anything from people who don't challenge my beliefs, but I learn a lot when someone challenges what I think. And they have that right. And I tell people all the time, you don't have to believe anything I say. Just file it away, and maybe at some point you might have an experience, or somebody you know that you trust might have that experience, and you'll have a reference. But everyone has a right to their opinion.
I don't think that they'd harm a human being unless you're in an area where they don't want you to be, and then they'll warn you to leave. Oh, then leave. Just leave it, because there are certain areas that they hold sacred, so by doing that, if they ask you to leave, if they're throwing things at you, if they threw something at you that wanted to hit you and hurt you, they could do it. And they don't do it because all they're asking you is to leave. And just leave and say, hey, I apologize for intruding upon your area. The Native Americans knew that they existed, and they say, leave them alone. And so that's where I kind of go. I leave them alone until I get a chance to get out there with them. I'm an old man, but I hope that before I'm gone, I can learn a lot more about them.
A lot of the people think you shouldn't mess with them. The Native American lore, I've talked to several Native Americans over the years, and they think just leave them alone. There are people out there, we leave them alone. But Native Americans have this thing. They live in two worlds. Somebody explain that one. What's the two worlds? There's our world and the quantum world. And of course, I want to get into 411 stuff, but I can't really do that. It's not my stuff. But a lot of people are missing that never come back. Unexplainable events around them that's happened, and that series of books is really eye-opening, because the ones that are friendly, fine, you'll come back. But what if they're not friendly? You may not come back. So what I tell people is, if he wants to get away and come back with only one arm, got beat over the head with the other arm, probably wasn't friendly,
Word of caution, I understand that people are having positive experiences with Bigfoot, and that for every bad experience, there's a good experience that somebody could share. But at least with my line of thinking, with what these things are, you would have to really be careful, because you might be getting this good vibe from your experience with Bigfoot, but if Bigfoot is what I think it might be, there might be a lot of deception and manipulation going on here. I think that these things are highly intelligent, and if they're as highly intelligent as I think they might be, then they clearly would be able to manipulate you, give you what you want so they can get close to you, for whatever reasons that is. I don't think they like us. That's my personal belief. I know that a lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine. I don't personally think that they do like us, and if you do get a good experience with them, I think it's more of a manipulation situation than it is anything. I've heard of people gifting and habituating these things, and you might be having the greatest experience with it. You might be loving it. It might be awesome and amazing. But what happens? Now, these things are huge. These things are extremely strong, and they're very physical. So whether you think that they're a great wisdom spirit or anything like that, the fact is they are very physical. What happens when you die? What happens if you move? What happens if somebody else over time migrates into the area that you've been doing this, and they don't know that you've been doing this, and all the Bigfoot sees is another person who should be doing what it wants them to do, and it's not? You got to worry about that. And I've heard of stories of that, where people go into an area and they experience this aggressive behavior from these Sasquatch, and that's when they find out they're real, and it makes you wonder what was going on before that, because they moved into an area that somebody had a cabin before, and they moved out, and you don't know what happened in between and stuff. And I do think that habituation and feeding these things causes that kind of reaction, because I think that as wise as they are, I shouldn't even say wise, I think as smart as they are, I think they do have very physical characteristics, instincts, and they don't care who you are. You're just a human, and they want certain things out of you. And so if you start establishing that kind of relationship, somebody else might have to withhold that kind of relationship as well to keep the peace. And if they don't know to do that, there's going to be a lot of problems for them. So do it for the people. I would like to say listen to your heart, but people listen to their heart and they get close to these things. So I think it really boils down to what's your background? What is your worldview of life? Not Bigfoot, not ghosts, not aliens, but just in general. What's your view of the world? Like, I operate off of my theological foundation. I'm a Christian, and I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And I believe what's written in the Bible. And so that's where I build my foundation. When I first started my Facebook group, Pennsylvania Sasquatch Research, I was talking to this one woman in a comments section. It was just a brief conversation, but she said that she gets visited by Bigfoot, and that they appear next to her bed in her bedroom, and that they mind speak to her. And she found it a very enlightening, encouraging, good experience. To this day, I don't view it that way. I don't think anything or anybody coming into my house uninvited is a good thing.
If there's one thing that I'd like people to know or to realize, is that we have to work together. And if there's one thing else I've learned, that none of us are nearly as smart as we think we are, because there are gigantic secrets in this universe that we're not even aware of. And it helps that if we ask these questions and work together, we're going to feel a lot less alone out there.